Hey everyone, we need to talk about capitalism.
Specifically late stage capitalism and how much it sucks because it affects this podcast that we pour our hearts and our souls and an embarrassing number of hours into every single week.
So here's the deal. We love making the show. We want to keep making the show. And we also want to pay our bills, which is a wild concept.
So, we've decided to let capitalism work for us for a change instead of just at us. Who knew that was possible? Starting soon, you're going to hear ads on this podcast. Starting this episode, actually.
We know, but before you spiral, we are vetting every single one. No rando weird stuff that flies in the face of everything that we actually believe in. Nothing like that.
If we wouldn't use it, recommend it to a friend, or at a minimum, feel completely fine looking you in the eye while talking about it. It's not getting on this show.
Basically, the content stays free, we stop working for free, and the ads will actually be things that align with what we're all about here.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. And sorry, not sorry that we're doing what we need to meet our needs.
Overwhelm looks really like two things. One is over planning, and the second one is underdoing. So we get so focused on the plan that we need to do all the research on the plan and the right way to do the plan and the right sequence to do the plan that we then 6 months later have not done any of the action that is actually in the plan. We have done so much time, spent so much time refining the plan that we then don't actually reap the benefits of having a plan. And when that happens, we feel like it's failure when nothing changes. And then that failure confirms the fear. And then we go back to over planning, over focusing, over planning, over researching, over planning, and being afraid to implement. And it just keeps going and going and going. There is no end unless you intentionally find a way out.
Welcome to Enrichment for the Real World, the podcast devoted to improving the quality of life of pets and their people through enrichment. We are your hosts, Allie Bender.
And I'm Emily Strong.
And we are here to challenge and expand your view of what enrichment is, what enrichment can be, and what enrichment can do for you and the animals in your lives. Let's get started. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Enrichment for the Real World. And I want to thank you for rating, reviewing, and subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts.
Last week, we talked about how multiple problems are usually one animal in distress, not 5 separate emergencies. Like usually they're just multiple symptoms of the same underlying cause. Today, we're going to go one level deeper into the plans we build in response to that distress and what it means when those plans are built on our anxieties instead of clarity, instead of purpose, instead of our actual goals. Here's why this matters. Anxious plans don't just fail the dog or whatever other species you're working with. They exhaust the human. And an exhausted human is the most common reason that a good training plan collapses. Clients don't follow through to the end. We don't get to reach our goals. Everybody's sad, right? And I want to say again, this isn't about blame. It's not about shame. Been there, done there. Nope, that's not how that phrase goes. Let me start that again. Been there, done that, got that t-shirt. It's about recognizing a pattern so that you can interrupt it and redirect to something that's more productive and feels better for everybody involved. So by the end of this episode, you'll be able to recognize the difference between a plan built for the dog or whatever other species you're working with and a plan built for your fear, anxieties, insecurities. If you're a behavior professional, your need to prove to your client that you are actually competent and good and they're getting their money's worth. Because let me tell you, friends, I don't know how many people in Pet Pro have told us that that's why they build these monstrous plans, these monstrosities. I also hope that by the end of this episode, you'll have some language for what to do when you catch yourself in the second one. You'll have a script for yourself so you can talk yourself down off of that novel building ledge that we've all been on at some point or another. Maybe all of us haven't. Ellen, you are the most succinct person I've ever met. Have you ever been on that ledge of all the the thick plans?
So what I think is the most funny is I planned this episode arc, I don't know, like a month ago, and I did the thing and I didn't need to do the thing anymore. So I totally forgot that we were doing this episode. And as you're going through that, I was like, oh, I made this episode as an attack on me specifically. And I don't do this for my clients, but this is what happens with my own dogs. Like, I think I've said many times on this podcast before, probably in blogs, in Pet Pro, on social media, probably everywhere. I'm very open with this. One of the ways that I exert control when I feel like I don't have control in the world is on my pet's experience. And so, how much we're going to work on and what we're going to make progress on and what they're going to learn is one of the ways that I try to like lock it down and feel like I have some semblance of control in a very wild world. And so it can very quickly go from a very sustainable plan with my dogs where everybody is happy, healthy, and making good progress. And like any onlooker would assess that this is working and going well to an entirely overwhelming, I'm going to do all of these things and with what time because I didn't actually change anything. And it so quickly snowballs into this. Who's the guy that carries the stuff on his shoulder?
Oh, Atlas? Is it Atlas? I feel like it's Atlas.
Either way, whatever snowball I'm now carrying is eating me rather than me being able to hold it in my hands.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me that it has been so long since I've studied the classics that I don't remember who you're talking about. But seriously though, I thank you for sharing that because here's the thing about you that makes it extra potent for you to share that this happens to you also. In addition to you being the most succinct person I've ever met in my life, also you went from actual like facilities where your full-time job was doing kind of enrichment and stuff, so you weren't making plans for clients, to a facility where you might have been making plans for clients. You were making plans for clients, but it was in this very structured like group class. I'm here for very specific sports or basic manners or whatever, to Pet Harmony, where by the time that you joined us and we put a ring on it, Allie and I had already made those mistakes, learned from them, adjusted our plan. So we taught you efficient training plans for consultations, for behavior consultations for complex cases. So all of your experience, in theory, should have prevented you from doing the anxiety novel writing. And yet you still find yourself doing that. You still get caught in that trap for your own pets. And I hope that our listeners feel validated by that, because I think that's an incredibly powerful point, that even when people have never experienced that with clients because their life experience prevented them from getting into that trap, it can still happen, right? Which I think speaks to the universality. Universality, is that how you say that? I'm going to just go with it. Let's pretend that's the right way to say that. I think it speaks to the universality of this experience, that like when we're anxious and insecure and we don't feel like we have control and we feel like we've got something to prove, yada, 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 all the reasons, the tendency, which is a very human common thing, is to just stack plan on plan on plan on plan on plan.
Yeah, I assume it's human. Maybe it's not human. I don't know enough humans to say that it is fully human, but in the humans that I know, it seems like a default way to approach things.
Within my selection bias, it is incredibly common.
And man, I really wish I knew if this isn't human and this is learned and there are cultures that don't do this. I would like to know who they are because I need to study their way of life.
Right? Right? I need to know like what cultures out there don't do this and how we can be more like them.
The first part is naming the pattern. And for me, I start to notice when the goal isn't that my pets demonstrate that their needs are met, that my pets have a good quality of life, but making sure that I have everything covered. And that is a very subtle difference between the two, because when I am trying to make sure that their needs are met and they have a high quality of life and their welfare and well-being and all of that, it is also making sure that everything is covered. But when I switch to trying to have a checklist of things that I can work through is when it starts to be problematic. And that is when it can very quickly go from, my 10-year-old dog is still dog reactive. In fact, I think it's my guess Griffey doesn't get to go out very often because of his allergies. They're so bad. And tangent, we're in the stage in the Pacific Northwest that I am just constantly reminded that male trees exist and that they are just trying to put everything everywhere because we look out and our deck is just green with pollen. It is not great for a dog with severe environmental allergies. But he is dog reactive. At this point, I think I would probably upgrade him to dog aggressive because I would suspect that there are a lot of dogs that he would choose to fight if given the opportunity to do so rather than flight. Some of that is going to be lack of practice. Some of that is going to be medically based. The higher his pain level is, the more he is going to try to go for the offensive versus the defensive. And as a professional who helps people with this all of the time, and I have the skills and the knowledge to be able to help Griffey potentially learn a different behavior pattern, the fact that I haven't can sometimes be really heavy. But then I have to look at literally everything else that we have tackled in our life together and say, no, that was a concession. Like he can do all of these other things that we never thought possible. I put that to the side to make room for things that matter more in his day to day.
Yeah, that's such a powerful example of what we're talking about and how to recognize it and pull yourself out of it. Because I think that for pet parents, there's this fear that if you don't do everything, something terrible will happen. And to be fair, that's not an unreasonable fear sometimes, because a lot of times there are like neighbors threatening you and family members shaming you and whatever. There are like actual consequences sometimes for some people. So like, yes, your fear that your dog will get worse, you'll be judged, you'll get in legal trouble, like you'll have like let them down and you're not a good pet parent, and like the internet has already told you many times that you aren't, like that is real. That's real, right? And for Pet Pro, the fear is that if you miss something, the case will fall apart and that will mean something about you as a professional, or your client won't feel like they got their money's worth and they're like, I can't believe I paid you X amount of dollars for this puny little plant. Or you'll feel like your client doesn't really think that you're good at your job and they'll give you a bad review. It's amazing to me how many people in our industry live in fear of bad reviews. And friends, let me just tell you that like some of the worst, most abusive trainers I've ever seen have had horrible ratings on the internet, and they still continue to get clients despite like abundant evidence that they are abusive trainers. So like the thing that brings out my inner mama bear is when people are like, I don't want to make this good decision because I'm afraid of getting a bad review. And I'm like, we can't afford for all of you good ethical trainers to be scared to make good decisions, because the people who are actually abusing animals are paying a ton of money, they're getting horrible reviews, and they're still thriving and they're still out there multiplying. So like, you need to get brave because we can't afford for you to be scared.
Or better yet, do it scared.
Or do it scared. That's it. Yes. I had one of my mentees in the like older version, the proto Pet Pro, asked me, how do you do these things when I know you have told me how anxious and upset and angry and hopeless you feel about things, because they were working with me at really one of the lowest points of my life when I was incredibly anxious, depressed, angry. And I was very open with my students about the journey that I was going on. And I just said something like reflexively. And then as soon as I said it, I was like, this is so true. I just like need it on a mug or something. Because my response was, well, when the only thing worse than doing the thing is not doing the thing, you just do the thing. And as soon as that came out of my mouth, I was like, ouch, that is true. Like, you just do it scared, you do it depressed, you do it anxious, because if you don't do it, the consequences are worse. And yes, friends, I realize that is operating off of a negative reinforcement contingency. But when you are in a situation that is the only reinforcement available to you, don't deprive yourself of that reinforcement. Relief can be powerful, friends.
A lot of life is a negative reinforcement contingency. I don't necessarily eat because it brings me joy. I love it when it brings me joy, but I eat because I need the relief in a number of ways. I don't necessarily sleep because I love sleeping all of the time. I do enjoy some good sleep, but I sleep because again, it's negative reinforcement. It's very punishing to stay awake after a certain point.
Yeah, yeah. I love sleep, and also there are many times in my life when I would rather stay awake and keep doing the things that I'm really enjoying doing, but the sleep demands that it happens, right? And this is not the episode to talk about the difference between socially mediated negative reinforcement. And it's not actually, I learned in Kiki's episode that it's not socially mediated, but friends, I'm using the word that I know right now and I'll fix that later. But we can talk later about the difference between negative reinforcement that is inserted into the learner's experience for the intention of coercion and negative reinforcement that's just a response to the environment. This is not the episode for that. I don't want to get too far off track, but I want you to be aware that sometimes doing it scared is, yes, a negative reinforcement contingency, and also if that is the best you have available to you, don't deprive yourself of that reinforcement, right? Okay, so back on track. We went on a little tangent. I'm not sorry, I don't regret it, but let's get back on track. So, for both the pet parents and the pet pros, the reasons for piling plan on plan on plan are completely understandable. But neither produces good plans that are sustainable, realistic, most of the time not even effective, because when a learner is trying to learn too many things and they have too many contingencies in their decision tree, it's really hard for them to make those good decisions. We want clear, consistent contingencies in a pretty small decision tree so that our learners can really learn well. In this context, I do this thing. In this context, I do this thing. So those plans aren't even necessarily effective, much less sustainable.
And that overwhelm looks really like two things. One is over planning, and the second one is underdoing. So we get so focused on the plan that we need to do all the research on the plan and the right way to do the plan and the right sequence to do the plan that we then 6 months later have not done any of the action that is actually in the plan. We have done so much time, spent so much time refining the plan that we then don't actually reap the benefits of having a plan. And the important thing is to start small, like you said. So if we have a decision tree, start with decision one of the tree. Don't have the whole, we want to start with a sapling, not an old growth. And when we start with the sapling, you make one decision and then you get more information, which is going to change the rest of your plan. So part of the problem when we make these big convoluted plans instead of doing one thing at a time is that every time you make a change, you then have to reassess literally everything in your plan to make sure that it still works under the changes you just implemented. So when we take it one step at a time, one, you're going to be more efficient. Two, it's not going to feel so overwhelming. And three, we're not so focused on everything be right, because that overwhelm, I see this a lot with my clients. I have been there before, which is probably one of the reasons that I clock it as early as I do, is that we're so focused on getting it right that we're afraid to do anything. And when that happens, we feel like it's failure when nothing changes. And then that failure confirms the fear. And then we go back to over planning, over focusing, over planning, over researching, over planning, and being afraid to implement. And it just keeps going and going and going. There is no end unless you intentionally find a way out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell on myself because, again, like I said, been there, done that, got that t-shirt. And I think the time that I did this the worst, let me put it that way. The worst case that I can remember where I was just stacking plan on plan on plan on plan on plan was when I was still living in Utah. I had a client. It was really complicated. She had been in a relationship with a cis man, and he really wanted a Borbell because he wanted the tough dog, and very, very typical of the culture there of like, I need a dog that's super masculine and ripped and like doesn't take any stuff from anybody. And so bought a dog. I feel like probably from a sketchy breeder, right? and then trained that dog with really coercive and aversive training methods to be, because he believed not only was that in alignment with his ideology, but he believed that that's what he needed to get this dog to be the tough, like, guard dog that he wanted. And then the dog bit a neighbor, and of course the neighbor pursued legal action, and the dude bounced, left the woman with the dog, broke up, just left her holding the mess.
I have so many words and none of them can be said on this podcast.
Yeah, I don't talk about this case very often because it has taken me a long time to be able to talk about it without just instantly devolving into a rage spiral. But look at me, therapy works, friends. But anyway, so this woman was not necessarily ideologically aligned with me either, or not with me, but with our methods. But she was so beside herself about what to do in this situation that she got, I would say, low-key bullied by some people on the internet to work with me. Because, oh, I remember now. She had tried to give the dog to a local rescue group, and they were like, no, but you have to go see Emily. So I'm working with a dog who has a big, strong dog with a bite history, with very little positive reinforcement learning history, which means that this is a dog who doesn't know how to learn, who doesn't explore, try new things, who has no concept of enrichment of any kind, with a client who is in the midst of legal trouble and also not my ICA, like not aligned at all, right? Who's paying me money because basically the rescue group low-key bullied her into working with me. I was so anxious, friends. I was so anxious about this case. And I wanted to prove that I was knowledgeable, that there was a reason that the rescue group required her to work with me, that I did know how to work with Borbells, even though everybody in her life had told her that positive reinforcement trainers can't work with this breed. By the time I was working with this client and her dog, it was a hot mess. And I got in and started working with this dog, and it wasn't just directed aggression. It was all the things that you would expect from a dog who had abusive training: body handling issues, reactivity, avoidance, pottying away from like hiding to potty in the house because of history of punishment for being seen pottying, resource guarding. I can't remember. It was like it just one thing after another, right? Oh, sound sensitivity, because they had tried, so they had started with an shock, and then the dog started redirecting on them, so they moved to a beep, and so then anything that beeped would get the dog really amped up and angry. Hot mess, right? So I was just like, again, the same mistake that everybody makes. I was like, here's a plan for this, 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 and I was doing a plan for every single thing, even though I knew that was not, I knew how to write a plan addressing the underlying causes, but I felt really anxious about the fact that the dog, I was like, oh, this is going to go to court. I'm going to have proof that like I'm actually doing something about this case. And I need to prove to the client that I know what I'm talking about. And I need her to feel like she got her money's worth because she's not even sold on this plan. And it went exactly as you would expect it to go. And she didn't do any of it. She didn't do any of it. She even told me overtly, and I'm actually really grateful to her for this because most clients in Utah were not communicative, but she actually told me, like, this is really overwhelming to me. I don't know how to do this. And I'm really grateful that she did, because that was it was like a slap in the face. It was like a wake up call. Like somebody was shaking my shoulders and being like, what are you doing? You know that this isn't right. So we had a frank conversation. I apologized to her. I was like, you know what? You're right. I was freaked out by the legal stuff, the urgency that you're feeling, the complexity of the case. And I realize now that I gave you too much at once. So let's go back and figure out what feels the most urgent to you and how to prioritize this. And I went back and I did exactly what I already know how to do. But that case had just freaked me out of my existing skill set, right? We ended up working together. It was lovely. The neighbor dropped the case because he saw how hard she was working and he recognized that it was the dude who was causing the problem. Fortunately, we were not. We were in the county that was much more lenient towards dogs with bite histories. So we didn't have like any pressure from the legal system. That dog was never, she hit the end of her ability to keep going with the training and stuff. And so she settled on management plans for some of the things, but I got an email from her like 2 or 3 years later just saying, I love this dog. We have such a good relationship. We never would have had this relationship if it weren't for you. And even though like we live a somewhat cloistered life, like I'm so grateful. And I was like hard sobbing when I read that email because I needed to hear it. But like at that, if she hadn't been direct with me and told me she was overwhelmed, that case would have gone very differently. So I really am grateful to her in retrospect for her directness, because otherwise she would have just ran off and been like, yeah, positive reinforcement doesn't work. I tried it. It's too hard. It's too overwhelming. Right.
I've heard you tell elements of that story for the years. I think that's the first time I've heard you tell the whole story. I would have been so sweaty that entire time because there are so many layers of coercion that are in that are playing on everybody in that experience.
And I will say, I feel a little bit bad at how much trash I talk about Utah on this podcast, because there are lovely people there and there are lovely things about the state. But the reason I have so much bitterness is because, well, there's multiple reasons and we're not going to go into all of them. But one of the things is that exact thing, that there's just so many layers of coercion and it consistently goes bad, and nobody seems to recognize that what they're doing is the reason they're receiving the outcomes, the consequences that they're receiving. And I'm like, how can y'all be so how are you not seeing that like the reason you keep ending up in this situation is because you keep doing the same things over and over again. I can't tell you how many court cases I was involved in Utah. I was not in any court cases in Austin, friends. Like, what is going on? So, like, I apologize if anybody's listening in Utah and feeling like I hate you. I don't hate you. You're lovely. It's the culture of coercion and then the explanatory fictions that happen to explain the consequences of the coercion that just sucked my soul dry.
Yeah. I think that was a good demonstration of the naming of the pattern. Am I focused on welfare and well-being, or am I focused on a checklist? And you explicitly said, like, I got in there and my checklist was not actually helping. Obviously, you wanted to help the animal, but potentially your motivating operations were, can I cover my behind because this is a legal case? Can I meet whatever legal requirements that there are going to be rapidly so that it gives us more time that we are able to work on the other things? Can I make it so that this pet parent feels as though they want to continue with me through providing a robust amount of things rather than necessarily a robust amount of change and outcome, which are not simultaneously the thing. Also, I'm going to guess that there was some motivation to do what you thought the rescue or shelter would also approve of. So I think on top of am I turning it into a checklist, it might also be a secondary question, am I seeking approval rather than outcome? Because I know that's where some of mine has come from. Like, he can't bark at dogs because, I'm going to say capital T, capital I, the internet has said that that's a problem. And also, he can be home alone now. Like,
I will say you nailed it, that rescue group would refer out to a lot of different trainers. And there was only one other trainer other than me that they referred to that I trusted, their competency, their ethics, all of that stuff. And they were at a point where they were starting to see the difference in outcomes between when I worked with those dogs and the colleague that I trusted versus the other trainers they were referring out. So they were starting to rely more heavily on me for the complex cases and sending the easier stuff to the trainers that I don't agree with their practices, right? And so you're absolutely right that I had a fear of, like, if I mess this case up, they're going to go back to referring complex cases to these other trainers who have really, really unethical practices, right? So yeah, you nailed it.
Your plan was about avoidance, not about improvement, which means we can go to the next part and put kind of like two plans side by side. So plan one is the pet-centered, dog-centered, cat-centered, bird-centered plan. And that is focused on what does the individual in front of me need right now? What can this family unit realistically do? And what is the smallest change that makes the most traction? Back to, we want to plant our sapling. So what is one thing that we could do that is hopefully going to have a really big impact? And if you are a pet professional, this is an important thought exercise to do frequently and to limit yourself to, if I could only do one thing, one small thing, not a big thing, guised as a small thing, but literally one tiny thing that could get me a good impact, what would that be? And then if we look at the anxiety-centered plan, it is asking it's more focused on what could go wrong, what will people think if I don't include this, whose approval am I searching for, what do I need to cover myself to check all my boxes to feel complete and right, rather than making progress. They can look really similar on the surface, but when you dig in, you're going to find that the motivation between those two, while ultimately we may want to help the pet in both of those conditions, one centers you while the other is going to center the pet.
Yeah. That's I love that you brought that up, because it is very much, it's very hard to tell people who really love the animals and really want the animals to do well that you're making it about you, because I understand that can put people in a defensive position of like, what are you talking about? I'm in this profession because of, and my response is yes. And if you are in any way concerned about your reputation or proving yourself to your client, or that you're giving them money's worth, you definitely care about the animal, and nobody's questioning that, but you're prioritizing yourself. And that can be really hard to hear, and we're trying to say this gently and with love, and also coming from a place of like, we're not talking down to you, like we're right there. But what happens if we really truly prioritize the learners in our care is we see them be able to make progress in a sustainable way that feels good to them, because we are making a plan for them, not for us.
Yeah. So some telltale signs that you have created an anxiety-driven plan. And as a professional, I will also say I have clients that bring me anxiety-driven plans, and it is a skill to be able to help a client parse down, because you want to stay in your lane about what you can do with your pet, and also recognize that what the client is asking of themselves is not sustainable. And we help people with that in Pet Pro. That's outside the scope of this particular conversation. So, telltale signs of anxiety-driven plans. Number one, it addresses every problem at once. So if you were to write down every issue and then you look at the plan, you pretty much have a direct correlation between the number of issues you want to address and the number of things written on that plan. It requires a level of consistency that real life can't sustain. And I think that is the part where the failure is going to be felt the most, because you already know from the get that this is not going to happen. Number three, it doesn't account for the human's bandwidth, schedule, or capacity. Like I said, when I find myself in one of these spirals, I pull up my calendar and I make myself actually put it on a calendar what my life would look like if I was to implement the plan that I have in my head for my pets. And that is what helps me break out of it and be like, you don't have time. Like, you legitimately don't have time for all of the things that you want to do. It makes the pet parent feel more guilty, not more capable. And that is not our goal ever at Pet Harmony. I would like to say for behavior professionals, but I can't speak for everyone. And then the last one, it grows every time something new comes up instead of getting simpler. And there are going to be times where, yes, it's going to grow because something totally out of the suite of everything else that you were working on. So like when Griffey needed eardrops, that was totally outside of everything that we had worked on to date. That was more. But it also meant when Griffey needed eardrops, we dropped something else, so that when something got added, something else came off.
Yeah, yeah. The example that I have used multiple times on this podcast is the client who, when they started working with me, they were working with their dog 10 hours a day. It took them 10 hours a day to take care of their dog, more than a full-time job. Right, right. And so the plan that I gave them required them to work with their dog 4 hours a day, which is bonkers. I would never ask any client to work with their dogs 4 hours a day. And I don't mean training 4 hours a day, just like all of the care and enrichment and like antecedent arrangement, everything, right? But for them, it was a reduction by 6 hours a day. We more than halved their workload. And so, like, yes, sometimes your plan is going to be like pretty bonkers. But the litmus test for me is it simpler than what they were doing before? Right. And in that case, the 4 hour plan was the much simpler plan. And we continued to whittle that down. Right. But yes, sometimes you do have to add complexities because life is messy. But most of the time, we can make it really simple and just get to the core of what's going to help them. And I think an added layer of that is that another thing that we see a lot in Pet Pro is actually not just Pet Pro. I just recently we came back from Clicker Expo and I spoke at Clicker Expo, and I don't know how many times at Clicker Expo I was asked, how do I make sure that my client gets all the information they need and still keep the plan succinct? And the answer to that is like, you can overwhelm clients with education too, not just the plan. But if you feel like they need to know everything and your plan involves like 16 pages of handout explaining all the things that you think they need to know, I promise you, they do not need to know all of that. They need less on their plate and more confidence in what they're already doing. They just need to see that what they're doing works. And then if the client asks you for the why, if they ask you to explain it, if they want more information on why what they're doing works, then you can provide that education. But it's amazing to me how, again, in my selection bias, it is universal that when people are entering this field, they feel like they have to explain why everything works to their clients and they have to put it in the training plans. And again, like I did that too when I was a new baby behavior consultant. And I asked Susan Friedman, who was one of my mentors, like about this exact thing. And she chuckled and she was like, yeah, it's a sign of being a brand new baby behavior consultant that you feel like you have to explain the why to your clients. Like your clients don't need the why, but what you're going through is a very normal part of the learning process of being in this field. And it was a very gentle, loving way of her telling me like, "Oh, you're so green."
Look at you. But you acknowledged it and you reflected and you found it. So well done on that.
Thanks. But yeah, they don't your clients don't need to know why unless they're specifically asking you why. And that's when you pull out those handouts with the big explanation of how something works or why you're doing what you're doing or whatever. And that's really important too, because even if the plan itself is pretty succinct, but you've still got a 10-page plan that like 2 pages are the plan and 8 pages are the explanations, that still overwhelms the client, which means they still don't actually read and utilize the training plan, which means they're not making progress. It has to be something that a client can follow along with and that is simple enough that they can actually do, even if they do it imperfectly, that they can actually complete the tasks that you give them. And by the way, that is not lowering the bar. It's not lowering expectations. That is skillful scaffolding of other people's skills. I just realized I was using skill twice in the same sentence, but that is what scaffolding looks like. Is you make it simple, you meet the learner where they're at, you give them what they can handle, and then when they can handle something else, you give them the next thing. That's just how education works.
Yeah, I was working with somebody and they were like, the people who choose to continue with me is not what I want it to be. And so we went and did some troubleshooting and we looked at their initial consultations and I had them run through an exercise to assess like, what are you actually asking of your clients? And it was too much. Shocking. It is always too much. My plans are probably even too much sometimes. I can think of a couple in the recent past, but that's part of the trial and eval. And the consultant said, but I can't cut anything because this is the bare minimum. And what I told them was the bare minimum isn't what you think this person needs. The bare minimum, really the maximum, is what this person can do, which is not always going to be what we think someone needs, which leads us, Pet Pros, to some of the harder questions. The first one, if you're feeling the urge to add one more thing to the plan, ask yourself, is this for the dog? Is this for the cat? Is this for the bird? Is this for the pet parent? Or is this because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't include it? Am I including this for me rather than for one of the learners that I am currently working with? If it is for you, leave it off. Don't include it unless it is for the dog or the pet parent or the cat or the bird or whatever species you are working with. You want to make sure that your plan isn't created for your anxiety. It is created for their learning journey.
So I think one of the things that one of the reasons that we all have this tendency to just make a plan as comprehensive as possible is because we believe that it's more ethical. If we give our clients all the information and all the skills and teach them how to address everything, we are setting them up to respond to situations in more ethical ways so they don't go rogue and do their own thing. But the reality is that if the plan is too much and they don't read it, the plan collapses after 2 days. And honestly, friends, I think 2 days might be generous sometimes. I think maybe the plan just collapsed before they even started it, right? Because it was too much for them. And so they end up not doing any of it, which is not more ethical. It's not giving them more ethical responses to the situations at hand. If you give them a simple plan that they can sustain for 2 months, you are improving the way they respond to their pet's behavior. So how do we build or rebuild a plan that's actually for the animals, that's actually for the pets who need the support? We start with an audit question. So look at your current plan or the plan that you're about to write. And for each item, ask, if I removed this, would the dog or cat or parrot or horse be meaningfully worse off? Or would I just feel less covered? Anything that's there for the second reason is worth examining. We need to go back to that.
The next thing is to ask, what is the minimum effective plan? So I already mentioned the minimum and or maximum effective plan is the one that your client can actually do, not the one that you think that they should get. But what is the one thing, if done consistently and correctly, would move this dog forward the most? Start there. Let that work. Let that start to make changes in the environment under which you, your client, and the pet are working in. This isn't lazy. This isn't, I don't know, throw any other adjective, label in there. This is how sustainable progress actually happens. When we make a change, we expect a change. If you are making changes and you're not expecting change, that's not how this works.
Right. What are you doing it for?
Right. And so, let's revisit that. Start with one thing. If done consistently, what would make the biggest difference?
And then the next thing is to design not just for the non-human learners in your care, but also the human caregivers who are taking care of them, the human guardians who are taking care of them. I said care twice in one sentence. I don't know what's up with me today. So a good plan accounts for how much time the family realistically has, their stress level, their relationship with their pet, their history with training, just their bandwidth in general, and also I would say their neurotype. So if you build a plan for some imaginary super family who can do all the things, they have unlimited time and energy and bandwidth, they absorb and learn and can do skills very easily, they have zero anxiety, that's not a good plan. That's a fantasy. And there's a time and place for fantasies. But working with clients is not that time or place.
Pet parents, if you are working with a professional and you are feeling overwhelmed, if you have not talked about it already, remember what Emily said earlier, that was one of the things she was eternally grateful for with her client in Utah, being like, I don't know how to do this. I'm overwhelmed, because there are going to be times where we miscalculate. There are going to be times where we don't necessarily either remember to ask, or if I've had clients that have problems with sleep, and so we don't know what phase of their sleep problems we're going to be in, and the plan needs to adjust to the reality that is currently there. So a plan that was great for a week ago could be quite, in fact, terrible for this time. And it's not anybody's fault. Conditions changed. It's not failure, it's self-awareness. So if you have a plan that's overwhelming, go back and ask yourself the same questions. Is this going to meaningfully impact my pet's quality of life, their welfare, and their well-being, or am I trying to cover something for myself?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize once again that building anxiety-driven plans is not a character flaw. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person if you had a moment where you prioritized your anxiety over your learner's experience. That's just a really common human experience. And it happens to all of us, and it still happens to those of us who are speaking right now. And what it actually means is that you care a lot and you feel out of control. So the goal isn't to stop caring. Your goal is to channel that care into something that your learners can actually benefit from, so that you also get everything that you want to get, and the reason that you're making the anxiety-driven plans, you will actually get if you create instead learner-driven plans. So it will, your clients will feel like you're competent. They will feel like they got their money's worth. They will feel like you know what you're doing and that you have helped them. All of the motivators for the anxiety-driven plans actually happen when you prioritize your learners.
When we're overwhelmed, we build plans for our anxiety. That's the TLDR. And for those of you that don't experience anxiety, congratulations. Maybe you skipped this episode and you're not actually hearing me say this, but we want to build those plans for our pets and for the life that we actually live, not maybe the life that we are necessarily grieving. So I know for me, every time I'm like, there are so many things I want for my dog's lives, and I can't do all of those things. Some of that comes with an element of grief, that the conditions aren't that I can spend 4 hours a day out in the woods with my dogs. Not that they would like to do that anyway, because reasons, but like, that's the time for fantasy. Those are the fantasies we can have. The most useful thing to do is reflect on your plan and say, who is this plan for? Is it for my pets or for me? If it is for you, if it brings you joy, I'm not here to take joy away from you, but mostly what we're talking about here are the plans that lead to distress, and we don't want that for you.
Yeah. So this week, look at whatever plan or approach you're currently using for your own pet or with a client. Pick one thing that's on there that primarily makes you feel covered, not necessarily for the animal as much as making you feel like it's a CYA thing, right? And then ask yourself, what would happen if you let that one thing go? So you've got your homework for this week. Next week, we're going to bring this all together with the question everyone wants answered. What do you work on first and why? We're going to give you a thinking framework, not a protocol. We just don't need any more protocols, friends, but we do need more frameworks. So we're going to give you a framework for how to make that call. And that will be happening next week on May 18th. And if this episode hit a little too close to home, and you can think of somebody else who might also feel lovingly attacked by it, go ahead and send it to them. Chances are you do know another trainer or pet parent who has written a plan at 11 p.m. in a mild state of panic and wondered why it wasn't being followed. So this episode is for them too. Go ahead and do them a solid and share it with them. All right, we'll see you next week.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if there's someone in your life who also needs to hear this, be sure to text it to them right now. If you're a pet parent looking for more tips on enrichment, behavior modification, and finding harmony with your pet, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Pet Harmony Training. If you're a behavior training professional dedicated to enrichment for yourself, your clients, and their pets, check us out on TikTok and Instagram at Pet Harmony Pro. As always, links to everything we discussed in this episode are in the show notes. Thank you to Ellen Yoakum for editing this episode and making us sound good. Our intro music is from Penguin Music on Pixabay. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps more pet lovers and professionals find us so they can bring enrichment into their world too. Thank you for listening, and here's to harmony.